When the United States Marine Corps landed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, they brought with them 308 specialized soldiers carrying one of World War II's most devastating weapons, the M2 flamethrower. By the time the dust settled after 36 days of relentless combat, only 18 of those men walked off the island alive. That's a casualty rate of 94%, the highest for any specialized military unit in American military history. But the true horror of their story extends far beyond these grim statistics. These brave Marines faced a combination of extraordinary dangers that transformed them into walking targets in the Pacific War's bloodiest battle, a small island, an enormous strategic prize. Iwo Jima is a desolate volcanic rock, just 8 square miles in size, sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean between the Mariana Islands and mainland Japan. To most people, it seems insignificant. But in 1945, this tiny patch of black volcanic ash became the most strategically valuable piece of real estate in the entire war. The United States military had become obsessed with capturing it, and the Japanese understood exactly why. American B-29 Superfortress bombers were conducting long-range missions from the Mariana Islands to strike targets deep inside Japan. However, their flight path took them directly over Iwo Jima, where Japanese radar stations and fighter aircraft could track the bombers and intercept them. More importantly, if America could seize the island, they could establish a forward air base for fighter escorts to protect the bombers throughout their entire journey, provide emergency landing sites for damaged B-29s, and launch more effective bombing missions with heavier payloads and shorter ranges. For every B-29 pilot, Iwo Jima represented either survival or death in the freezing Pacific waters thousands of miles from home. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had no illusions about the outcome. He knew Japan could not win this battle. He knew he would not survive. But he had been given a clear directive: make the Americans pay an unacceptable price. Buy time for Japan to prepare for the inevitable invasion of the homeland. Inflict such devastating casualties that the enemy would hesitate before launching Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan itself. The underground fortress Kuribayashi studied previous American victories at Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. He learned one critical lesson: traditional beach defenses didn't work. Naval artillery and aerial bombardment would obliterate soldiers positioned on the shore before the first American soldiers even set foot on the beach. So Kuribayashi did something revolutionary for Japanese military doctrine. He went underground. Starting in June 1944, Japanese engineers began carving an intricate tunnel system through Iwo Jima's soft volcanic rock. By the time American forces invaded, they had excavated over 18 kilometers of interconnected tunnels. Some sources say as much as 27 kilometers of planned tunnels were partially completed. These weren't simple caves. They were sophisticated military infrastructure, bunkers, pillboxes, machine gun nests, artillery positions, barracks, command centers, and storage areas, all linked by underground pathways. The tunnels allowed defenders to move between positions undetected to reinforce threatened sectors, and to escape from positions that had been cleared by grenades and explosives. American intelligence completely underestimated the Japanese garrison. Intelligence officers believed no more than 13,000 defenders held the island. The actual number was approximately 21 to 22,000 battle-hardened troops. But what intelligence missed completely was the scope of Kuribayashi's defensive network. Nearly every square inch of Iwo Jima was pre-surveyed. Artillery positions were already zeroed in on likely landing beaches and strategic positions. Interlocking fields of fire were designed so that machine gun positions could support each other from different angles. There were no traditional front lines, just a sophisticated network of mutually supporting positions connected by underground escape routes. The bombardment that failed. Starting on June 15, 1944, American naval vessels and aircraft began a relentless campaign against Iwo Jima. For 9 months, the United States Navy and Army Air Forces pounded the island with bombs, artillery shells, and missiles. Battleships and cruisers fired for hours at a time. B-29 bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives. By the time the landing craft hit the beach on February 19, 1945, the entire visible landscape appeared completely flattened. General Harry Schmidt, commanding the Marine Assault Forces, had requested 10 days of heavy naval bombardment before the invasion. The Navy granted him only 3 days, and even those 3 days were hampered by weather conditions that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Military planners, unaware of the extensive tunnel system, convinced themselves the bombardment had devastated the Japanese defenses. They assumed most defenders were dead, and the remaining soldiers would be disorganized and demoralized. They were catastrophically wrong. The slaughter begins when the first wave of 60,000 Marines landed on February 19th. They encountered the loose volcanic ash of the black sand beaches. Every man's footsteps sank into the sand, each step requiring extraordinary effort. Vehicles bogged down almost immediately. Troops could barely dig foxholes for cover. The sand would cave in faster than they could dig. For nearly an hour, the beaches remained eerily silent. Marines inland began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps the bombardment had worked after all. Then, as the beaches became packed with men, thousands of Marines crowded together with no cover, General Kuribayashi gave the order. In a coordinated assault of devastating precision, Japanese artillery, mortars, and machine guns opened fire simultaneously. Shells and bullets tore into masses of humanity packed on the black sand with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Marines were cut down in clusters. The casualty rate was appalling, but somehow the Marines pushed forward, digging in with bayonets and entrenching tools, advancing inland one painful yard at a time. As they moved deeper into the island, the Marines began to grasp the magnitude of their predicament. They would clear a bunker with grenades and satchel charges, silence the machine gun fire coming from a position, and believe they had secured an area. But minutes later, Japanese soldiers would emerge from tunnel entrances behind them, reopening fire from positions that the Americans thought they had eliminated. This happened again and again, a maddening pattern of clearing and reclearing the same ground while casualties mounted. the pillbox problem. The most devastating defensive positions were the Japanese pillboxes, hardened concrete fortifications equipped with machine guns and positioned with overlapping fields of fire. Some were so carefully camouflaged that Marines could walk right past them without realizing what they were looking at, until the machine guns opened up and men began to fall. Clearing a pillbox was a nightmare. First, you had to survive long enough to approach it. Then you had to locate an opening that wasn't being swept by interlocking machine gun fire. If you managed to toss a grenade through a firing slit, the blast might not reach all the defenders because many pillboxes were constructed with zigzag internal passages to minimize blast effects. Sometimes a grenade would do minimal damage, and the Japanese soldiers inside would continue fighting. The standard infantry tactics grenades, rifle fire, satchel charges were insufficient against these well-designed fortifications. The flamethrower became the only weapon that truly worked, the weapon that saved lives, and cost them. The M2 flamethrower was a backpack weapon, a technological marvel of portability and devastation. It weighed roughly 30 pounds empty, but when fully loaded with fuel and nitrogen propellant, it weighed 70 pounds more than half a soldier's body weight. The operator carried two 2-gallon tanks of thickened gasoline and a 1/2-gallon tank of compressed nitrogen. A long metal tube connected the tanks to a flame gun with dual triggers. The specifications seem almost inadequate for such a terrifying weapon. The effective firing range was only 20 meters, about 65 feet. The maximum range extended to 40 meters, but accuracy and penetration decreased significantly beyond 20 meters. Most critically, the flamethrower burned for only approximately 7 seconds with a full tank. That's all the time a Marine had to approach the target, aim, and fire. 7 seconds of uninterrupted exposure during which he represented the most visible target on the battlefield. The advantages were significant. When a flamethrower ignited inside a pillbox, the flames could reach temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit inside the confined space. The intense heat would consume all the oxygen in the bunker, suffocating anyone inside, whether they were directly hit by flames or not. The psychological impact on defenders was devastating. Japanese soldiers knew exactly what a flamethrower would do to them if an operator got close enough. But using a flamethrower on Iwo Jima was essentially a suicide mission disguised as a military necessity. The hunt for a marked man. The moment a flamethrower operator moved forward with his distinctive 3-tank backpack, every Japanese defender on that section of the island knew exactly what he was, what he intended to do, and what he represented. The bright orange stream of flame impossible to miss, impossible to mistake for anything else, marked the operator as the highest priority target. Japanese machine gunners, riflemen, and artillery spotters would concentrate their fire on that one man. A squad of Marines with rifles and machine guns would attempt to suppress the Japanese fire, trying to keep the flamethrower operator alive long enough to reach effective firing range. But against well-positioned defenders with interlocking fields of fire, it was an almost impossible task. The operator, encumbered with 70 pounds of equipment on volcanic terrain that was soft and treacherous, had to move forward while staying low enough to avoid the heaviest fire. Every step was agony. Every meter gained felt like an eternity. Some flamethrower operators never made it. They were cut down by rifle fire or machine gun bursts before they could reach their targets. Others made it close enough to deploy their weapon, but in the chaos and smoke of battle they missed, or the thick fuel mixture didn't ignite properly, or a sudden wind gust blew the flames in an unexpected direction. A handful managed to reach effective range, deliver their 7-second burst of liquid fire directly into a pillbox, burn out the position, and survive to withdraw and reload. Most did not survive to withdraw. The human cost? The statistics tell part of the story. Out of approximately 380 flamethrower operators deployed on Iwo Jima, 362 became casualties. In one Marine battalion, the casualty rate reached 92%, not just wounded casualties, but dead, missing, or so severely injured they could never return to combat. To put this in perspective, regular rifle platoons on Iwo Jima sustained approximately 33% casualties across the entire battle. Artillery units positioned behind the front lines suffered far lower rates. Even tank crews, despite the vulnerability of their vehicles to Japanese anti-tank weapons, experienced lower casualty rates than flamethrower operators. Military statisticians calculated that flamethrower operators had an average combat lifespan of approximately 4 minutes. Some lasted longer, some didn't make it 4 minutes. The calculation was based on the simple mathematics of deployment. How many men were used, how many survived each day of combat, how long until available flamethrower operators were either killed or wounded too severely to continue fighting. Heroes in orange flame. Among those who served as flamethrower operators was Corporal Herschel Woody Williams. On February 23, 1945, the same day American forces raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, Williams found himself at Hill 362, facing a network of interconnected concrete pillboxes that had stopped 3 entire Marine companies cold. His demolition unit had been decimated. All 6 of his fellow specialists were either dead or severely wounded. Only 4 riflemen remained to provide covering fire as Williams moved forward with his flamethrower. What happened next would earn Williams the Medal of Honor. For 4 hours, under constant machine gun fire, Williams repeatedly returned to his own lines, obtained fresh flamethrowers or reloaded fuel tanks, and moved back to the front. He destroyed multiple pillboxes by personally inserting the nozzle of his flamethrower into firing slits and air vents. When Japanese soldiers charged him with bayonets in a desperate attempt to stop him, Williams fired a burst of flame that instantly burned away the oxygen around them, collapsing their lungs and ending the fight. The citation described his actions as demonstrating conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Williams received the Medal of Honor from President Harry Truman in October 1945. He remained alive for nearly 80 years, becoming the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from World War II before his death in June 2022. But even with his extraordinary heroism and survival, Williams struggled with profound psychological trauma, experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder for decades after the war. Another flamethrower operator, Corporal Joseph Anthony Joe Rybakiewicz from Perth Amboy, New Jersey, landed on Iwo Jima on February 21st, so seasick that he immediately collapsed face first into the black sand and vomited. Over the next 30 days, he would become one of the most effective flamethrower operators on the island, personally destroying 7 pillboxes and caves while rescuing at least 2 wounded comrades under fire. Yet, Rybakiewicz would later recall the psychological weight of his actions. Those caves, especially in the last days when the Japanese were running out of ammunition, you never knew how many people were hiding in a cave. I never knew how many people I was killing with the flamethrower. I still wonder how many people died from my flamethrower. The uncertainty haunted him for the rest of his life, as did the items he recovered from a Japanese soldier. He had killed a photograph of the soldier's family and a medical kit that he would later attempt to return through the Japanese consulate. The flame tanks. By mid-battle, American commanders realized that infantry portable flamethrowers were simply too dangerous for the operators. They introduced the M4A3R3 Zippo flame tanks, Sherman tanks, modified to replace the standard 75mm gun with a sophisticated flamethrower system. These tanks carried approximately 300 gallons of thickened fuel and could project flames up to 100 yards, almost 5 times the effective range of the portable flamethrower. The flame tanks were devastatingly effective. Japanese defenders had no good defense against armored vehicles spewing torrents of napalm-laced flames. The tanks operated in coordination with supporting infantry and regular tank destroyers, clearing pillbox complexes with efficiency that portable flamethrowers could never achieve. 8 M4A3R3 Zippo flame tanks proved to be among the most valuable weapon systems on Iwo Jima. However, even with tank armor providing protection, these vehicles were priority targets, and Japanese anti-tank gunners took every opportunity to attack them. The final accounting. The 36-day Battle of Iwo Jima resulted in staggering casualties on both sides. The United States Marine Corps and supporting Navy personnel suffered 26,000 casualties, including approximately 6,800 to 7,000 killed in action. Out of the approximately 21,000 to 22,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 1 to 100 were captured alive. The remaining 20,000 soldiers died fighting or by their own hand. Remarkably, Iwo Jima saw an unprecedented 27 Medal of Honor, recipients more than any other battle in United States military history. These medals recognized acts of extraordinary heroism and self-sacrifice performed by ordinary men under extraordinary circumstances. Legacy and memory. The massive scale of casualties on Iwo Jima shocked the American public and military leadership. It became clear that the invasion of the Japanese homeland Operation Downfall would result in far greater casualties than anyone had predicted. Some historians argue that these casualties at Iwo Jima, combined with similar devastating losses anticipated for mainland Japan, influenced the decision to use atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yet there was one undeniable achievement. Iwo Jima became a haven for American bombers. By the end of the war, more than 24,000 B-29 crewmen made emergency landings on the island. Pilots who would have crashed into the Pacific and drowned were instead able to reach friendly territory. The island, that cost nearly 27,000 American casualties, saved countless lives in the final months of the war. The flamethrower operators who served on Iwo Jima represented the absolute pinnacle of combat sacrifice. Out of 380 men who carried the M2 flamethrower onto that volcanic island, only 18 survived unscathed or lightly wounded. The remaining 362 became casualties at rates that stagger the imagination. They were young men, teenagers, and men in their 20s who volunteered or were assigned to the most dangerous duty in military history and fulfilled that duty knowing the odds were overwhelmingly stacked against their survival. Their story is one of extraordinary courage, devastating loss, and the terrible human cost of war.